Hi everyone! During discussion yesterday, we were going through assignment 2, part B, on syntax. And we only had time to do questions 1 through 5 and number 8. So I wanted to record myself doing questions 6 and 7 for your reference. In this video, I'll go over question number 7. And I've retyped it in my discussion slides to make it easier to see. So this question is quite similar to the ones that we saw last week on morphology. You're given some kind of data on a language that you probably don't know very well. Here it's Russian. And we see on the left-hand side, sentences in Russian, and on the right-hand side, they're English translations. And in this question, you're first asked to identify the English translations for these, the Russian forms for these words. And you should be able to do this with the data, even if you don't know Russian. Then we're going to go over how to look for inflection in numbers 2 and 3. So let's get started. So here I'm kind of helping you out a little bit. Russian has a subject-verb-object order. So it's similar to English. Notice how in the sentences on the right in English, we start with the subject, then the verb, then the object in all the sentences. So Russian has the exact same order. And in Russian, you could ignore the determiner the in the English translations. So Russian doesn't have a word that's equivalent to the. So for number 1, it says, list all the Russian forms with the following words. Basically, you kind of transfer what you're seeing in the English translation to Russian. So first is workman. Let's look to see all the sentences with workman in it in the English translation. Sentence A, C, and E. Since Russian has the same word order as English, it means that in A and C, if the subject is workman, then it's also the subject in Russian, and it comes first. So workman is rabotnik in A, C, and E. So for question number 7, part 1, we have workman equals rabotnik. I'm going to type on the right-hand side, and I'm not going to bother with the accent marks. I'm just to make things simpler. Then you basically do the same thing for all the other words. So workman, sentences B and D have that word, and the word order is the same in the two languages, so it's the first word in Russian, rabotniki. Then woman. Sentences A, B, E, and F have woman. Woman comes last in the English sentences, which means it also has to come last in the Russian sentences. So here we have zenskinu in all of the examples. Women, the plural, are in sentences C and D, and it's also the last word, so there would be zenskin. Defend, in English translation, it's the verb comes second. So we have the same thing in Russian. Zaski skajet. But notice that it's saying list all the Russian forms for the words. Notice that we have two different forms for the verb defend in Russian. Zaski skajet and zaski skajut. So we get zaski skajut in sentences B and D, and zaski skajet in the other sentences. So for defend, I'm going to list both versions. Zaski skajet, zaski skajut. Old, that appears in the 5th and 6th sentences. And notice again, there are two different forms, stari and staria. Staraya. Finally, mother. That's only in sentence F. It's the subject that comes after the adjectives, so it's mat. Okay, that's the answer to question 1. Basically, you're matching the English words to the Russian words. Let's go to number 2. It says, based on the data, what grammatical categories does the Russian noun inflect for? So recall from last week in morphology, we talked about inflection. Inflection was when you add different morphemes to create different grammatical categories for the same word. So an example of verbal inflection would be having the verb start and then adding the suffix ed in English to get from the present to the past tense. So start and started are both the same word, just different tenses. Similarly, we have noun inflection. So we go from cloud to clouds. Both come from the same word, but we add the suffix s to go from singular to plural. So whenever we're adding morphemes to change the grammatical category, but not changing the word, we're dealing with inflection. There are different grammatical categories that we see across languages that are consistently associated with these inflectional affixes. So the marking of nouns as singular or plural is actually very common across languages, and we call that inflecting for number. So here in this example, we would say that by adding the suffix s, we're inflecting in English for number. So going back to the Russian data, part 2 asks, what grammatical category does the Russian noun inflect for? Notice that there are only, there are 3 nouns. Let's ignore mother for now. We have workman and workmen, and woman and women. The difference is that one form is singular and the other is plural. And notice the Russian translations, workman, workmen, we're adding this suffix e to get the plural version of workman. Similarly, to go from the singular woman to the plural women, we're again doing some kind of morphology. We're removing this suffix u to get from singular to plural. So basically for number 2, you would say that the Russian noun inflects for number. In other words, it changes form based on whether the noun is singular or plural. And I said to ignore the word mother because we only have one instance of it in the data, but based on what we see, we would still expect mother to somehow inflect for number anyway, following the other nouns. Let's go to number 3. Based on the data above, what category does the Russian adjective inflect for? Notice that there's only one adjective in the whole data, old, and it's changing form for E and F. So in E we have stary, and F we have staraya. English doesn't have this inflectional category, but notice how the nouns associated with these adjectives differ in gender. So after stary in E comes the male noun rabotnik, which means workman. In sentence F, the adjective staraya is associated with the female noun mat, which means mother. And actually, if you're familiar with Spanish grammar, Spanish gendered nouns, you would know that they're nouns that have feminine and masculine. So other languages besides English make distinctions grammatically based on gender. So it seems that Russian is the same thing. So we would say that the Russian adjective inflects for gender. In other words, it changes form based on whether the noun is masculine or feminine. So that's the answer to question 7. Please see me at office hours if you have any questions about anything.